Have you ever thought you could get away with something just because no one's watching? Well, imagine this. A retired Coast Guard officer, after years of protecting the waters, finally settles into a peaceful life by the sea. But one seemingly innocent decision, one moment of recklessness, shatters everything. When his prized boat vanishes without a trace, he doesn't just look for it. He begins a hunt that will change everything he thought he knew about trust, betrayal, and the law. Who took his boat? And why did they think they could get away with it? But what they didn't know was that this wasn't just any man. This was someone who knew the sea like no one else. Get ready, because this story is about to take you on a journey of suspense, power, and a lesson no one will ever forget. After years of serving his country, serving on countless missions, and facing dangers that most people would never dream of, John had finally found peace. Now retired, he lived in a cozy coastal home with a view that stretched out across the water. His house wasn't just a building. It was a reward for decades of dedication and hard work. The sea had always been in his blood. It was where he had found purpose and peace. But now, in his golden years, it became his sanctuary, his escape from the hustle and bustle of life. A small boat sat by the private dock, his pride and joy. It wasn't just any boat. It was a symbol of everything he had worked for. For years, John had dreamed of this moment, living on the water, waking up every day to the gentle sounds of the sea, and spending his days fishing or simply reflecting on his life. But this tranquil dream, a life earned through sacrifice and service, would soon be threatened by forces he had not anticipated. This was supposed to be the golden age of his life, his retirement years, free from conflict, free from stress. And for a while it was. But as with most peaceful moments, life had a way of throwing curveballs, and John's would come in the form of his new neighbor. The new neighbor who had just moved into the gated community seemed like a dream come true at first. She was charming, well-spoken, and quickly became an active member of the Homeowners Association, HOA. On the surface, she fit the mold of someone who had it all together, someone everyone could trust. But beneath her polished exterior, John would soon discover that there was more to her than met the eye. Her name was Karen, and from the moment she moved in, she began to stir trouble. It started with little things, a comment about how the community's aesthetic was being ruined by the boats on the water, specifically John's boat. She didn't just stop at passive-aggressive remarks. As time passed, she began voicing complaints to the HOA about the private dock, demanding that it be restructured, that the boats be moved elsewhere. She even had the audacity to suggest that John should not be given special privileges simply because he had a dock. John, ever the calm and composed retiree, tried to ignore her. He dealt with difficult people before, both on and off the water. The best way to handle people like Karen was always the same. Pay them no mind, and they'll eventually go away. But Karen, it seemed, had no interest in leaving things alone. The more John stayed quiet, the more she pushed. And then something happened that would change everything. Something that would force John to take action. Something that would shatter his peaceful existence forever. One Sunday morning, the sun rising over the horizon, casting its golden light across the waters, John was in his usual routine. He woke up early, grabbed his coffee, and made his way down to the dock to inspect his boat. It wasn't just a boat to him. It was an extension of who he was. It had been a long week of reflection, and he couldn't wait to get out on the water, to lose himself in the rhythm of the sea. But as John walked down to the dock, his heart sank. His boat was gone. At first, it didn't register. Maybe he had forgotten where he docked it. Maybe the boat had been moved for some reason. But as his eyes scanned the dock, reality set in. His boat was gone, and this wasn't some minor mistake. The mooring ropes had been cut, and the boat was nowhere in sight. A chill ran down his spine. Someone had taken it. The adrenaline kicked in, and with it the realization that this wasn't just about a boat anymore. It was about something deeper, something far more personal. This was a violation of his trust, a betrayal, and it wasn't just any boat. It was his pride and joy, the symbol of his years of service, of his dedication to the sea. At that moment, John did what any seasoned Coast Guard officer would do. He remained calm. He didn't panic. Instead, he began piecing things together. He wasn't sure who was responsible yet, but he knew one thing for certain. They were going to regret it. John, ever the methodical thinker, quickly pulled out his phone and checked the boat's tracker. It was a state-of-the-art piece of technology, a feature that came with the boat when he purchased it. Within seconds, the screen lit up, showing the boat's exact location. And there it was, drifting far out to sea, moving farther away from the coast with every passing minute. He didn't waste time. He climbed into his vehicle and drove straight to the Coast Guard base. This wasn't just about getting his boat back. It was about preventing an emergency. The last thing John wanted was to deal with a situation where someone, especially a clueless amateur, ended up in danger because they didn't know what they were doing. The sea was unforgiving, and if Karen thought she could just take a boat without understanding the risks, she was about to learn a painful lesson. As John got closer to the base, he made the call. His colleagues couldn't believe what they were hearing. His HOA neighbor had stolen his boat? They were already laughing, but John's voice was steady. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't some petty crime. This was a serious mistake on her part, and it was time to rectify it. As the Coast Guard patrol boat sped out toward the tracker signal, John's mind was racing. This wasn't about the boat anymore. It wasn't about the inconvenience or the loss. It was about integrity. The woman who had been so quick to complain, to stir trouble, was now in over her head. She was alone on the water, unable to control the boat, drifting helplessly in circles. It was almost comical how out of her element she was. But John's heart wasn't light with amusement. It was heavy with disappointment. He had trusted her, at least on some level, as a neighbor. People like Karen, who believed the world revolved around them, who took what they wanted without thinking of the consequences, needed to understand that their actions had consequences. And sometimes those consequences weren't just a slap on the wrist, they were life-changing. As they approached the drifting boat, John's anger simmered beneath the surface, but it was tempered by something more powerful: experience. He wasn't going to let her off easy, but he wasn't going to let his emotions get the best of him either. The woman needed to understand what she had done, and in that moment, John knew that this wasn't just about teaching her a lesson. It was about teaching everyone who might think they could get away with taking what wasn't theirs. As John and his colleagues sped toward the drifting boat, the tension mounted. The waves crashed against the hull of the Coast Guard patrol boat, each splash of water a reminder of the dangers lurking out at sea. The journey was swift, but it felt like an eternity. Each second counted. The tracker signal kept leading them further into open water, where the risks were greater. John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Karen, in her panic, might not just ruin the boat, she might ruin herself. She was alone, untrained, and completely unprepared for the dangers of the open sea. If she made one wrong move, if she panicked even more, it could turn into an emergency. The sea was unforgiving. John had seen it take lives before, and the last thing he wanted was for this to turn into a tragedy that could have been avoided. They closed in on the location, and as they got closer, the boat became visible in the distance. It was spinning in wild circles like a lost animal, out of control and heading deeper into the water. The woman was nowhere to be seen, but her frantic screams could be heard even from a distance. It was a chaotic, unsettling scene, a scene that would haunt anyone who had been there. The closer they got, the more absurd the situation seemed. A woman from the HOA, who had once been so demanding and self-assured, was now helpless, stranded in the middle of the sea. Finally, John's boat pulled alongside the drifting vessel, and he saw her, the woman who had caused so much trouble in the community, the woman who had stolen his boat and was now crying out for help. She was disheveled, drenched in sweat, and gripping the steering wheel like a life raft, her knuckles white with fear. Her face turned pale the moment she realized who was approaching. John could see the panic in her eyes as she recognized him, the Coast Guard officer she had once thought she could push around. John didn't waste any time. His voice was steady, calm, but every word carried the weight of the situation. "This is the United States Coast Guard," he called out, his voice cutting through the frantic sound of her screams. "Identify yourself immediately." On the other end of the radio, there was only desperation. Oh my God, I'm lost. The boat's broken. Please help me." Her voice trembled with panic, but John could see right through her lie. The boat wasn't broken. It was her lack of skill and reckless actions that had caused the mess. John tried to hold back a smile. He'd spent years rescuing people in similar situations, but never had he encountered someone so blatantly irresponsible. "The boat isn't broken," John said, his voice low and controlled. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're lucky you're not in deeper trouble." John's calmness only seemed to make Karen more anxious. When they pulled up next to her, she immediately started screaming again, begging for help. But this time, John didn't feel sorry for her. He wasn't there to save her from her own mistakes. No, he was there to make sure she understood the consequences of her actions. "This is the Coast Guard," he said again, his tone unwavering. "You are in possession of a vessel that doesn't belong to you without permission and without any knowledge of how to operate it. Do you understand what that means?" Karen blinked rapidly, her face flushed with panic. She stammered, her words coming out in a jumbled mess. I just borrowed it, okay? It was just a quick ride, a misunderstanding. You can't treat me like this." John raised an eyebrow. "Borrowed it? That's funny. I didn't see you asking for permission. And I certainly didn't see you cutting the mooring lines in order to sneak off in the middle of the night." Her face went crimson with embarrassment, but she still tried to hold on to some semblance of dignity. I thought you wouldn't mind. You're a Coast Guard officer, right? You should understand. I just wanted to see the ocean." John leaned in, his voice cool. "What you don't understand is that when you take something that isn't yours, it's called theft. And in the eyes of the law, that's not a simple mistake, it's a crime." The reality of what she had done finally hit her. The bravado, the arrogance, all of it evaporated in an instant. She was no longer the confident HOA member, the woman who thought she could control the community with a few complaints. Now, she was just another person caught in a moment of recklessness, facing the consequences. As John and his team escorted Karen back to shore, the atmosphere was tense and silent. She sat in the boat, her hands tightly gripping the sides, staring at the ground, unable to look anyone in the eye. The once proud woman had been reduced to a nervous wreck, completely aware that she had messed up in a way that couldn't be undone. She didn't speak, didn't try to explain herself anymore. There was nothing left to say. The journey back to the dock felt long, the sound of the engine humming over the water, the only noise breaking the silence. Karen didn't try to protest anymore, didn't beg for mercy. The truth was she knew it was over. Her actions had consequences, and now she would have to face them. John didn't take pleasure in her humiliation. He didn't need to. The justice of it all was enough. She had learned the hard way that there were lines you don't cross, and when you do, you pay the price. When they finally reached the dock, the reality of what had just happened settled in. Karen was no longer the person who had been so vocal about what she thought she was entitled to. She was now just another person who had made a grave mistake. And as they prepared to hand her over to the authorities, John couldn't help but wonder if this experience would change her, if she would finally understand the lesson that many never learn: actions have consequences. The story didn't end with Karen's return to shore. No, the aftermath was just as important. Once the Coast Guard had escorted her off the boat, she was handed over to the police for questioning, and John made it clear that he was pressing charges. She could no longer hide behind excuses or try to manipulate the situation. The law was clear: stealing a boat was a crime, and Karen had stolen not just any boat, but the boat of a retired Coast Guard officer. In the months that followed, the once prominent member of the HOA was ostracized by the community. No one would look at her the same way again. The respect she had once commanded was gone, replaced by whispers and judgment. When word of her actions spread, the HOA removed her from her position, and soon after, she put her house up for sale. No farewell parties, no tears, just the end of a chapter that had been written with arrogance and poor choices. For John, life returned to normal. His boat was safe, secured with a reinforced system to prevent anyone from thinking they could just take it again. But more importantly, he had learned something too. The experience had reaffirmed a truth he had known for years. Some people need a hard lesson in humility to understand the value of integrity, respect, and the law. And for John, that lesson came in the form of a stolen boat and a neighbor who thought she could get away with anything. The real message? Never underestimate the consequences of your actions. No one is above the law. And sometimes the biggest lesson comes not in the form of a fine or a lawsuit, but in the loss of everything you thought you could control.